Hello. Okay, recently there was a thing by the press club. It was the ambassador from China to Australia being interviewed by journalists at the press club. It's interesting to note because it's actually quite fascinating, the style of questioning. Okay, I'll just show you what I mean. I'll just start from the beginning. I might not show all of it, but I might show enough because it's really quite an interesting thing.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have many questions from the media, and thank you again for your first speech to the National Press Club. Clearly, the tensions over Taiwan are a major subject at the moment, and you spoke about the importance of economic growth and economic partnership between Australia and China and the growth that China's achieved over decades. But do you accept that GDP growth does not mean much if war breaks out and if a nation is conducting military drills around the Straits of Taiwan, that then causes uncertainty and fear that then undermine that growth? Now, Nancy Pelosi's visit last week has led to several days of military drills, and the PLA announced yesterday that it was going to continue drills, including, from the reports I saw in the China Daily, surface-to-ship simulated attacks. Now, in what way is that the action of a stabilising nation? How long will those military drills continue?
This, for example, is really interesting of a start because this is where a lot of stuff is said. This be a trend across the board with this thing. Things be asked, things be said, even though it was made very clear by China about what their stance is previously, especially about the Taiwan thing. It's known very well and made very clear what the stance on Taiwan is. There's no need to be asked questioning about that. And if anyone who understands the impact of economics about escalation, it's China because they have to develop, and they still are developing around a position of this. Anyway, yeah, as I was saying, the response was apt.
Is it a question?
Yes. How long will
Well,
they
thanks,
continue?
David. Well, it's a question. The last one is a question, but I think before the question, there were a couple of points you made as a statement. Allow me to say a few words on the points that you made before your question. I think the question now is really about the essence of one China policy. The critical point is if every country put the one China policy into practice with sincerity, with no compromise, it's going to guarantee the peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The visit by Speaker Pelosi to the Taiwan region is exactly the reason that has caused the violation of the commitments by the U.S. government to one China policy, and has caused the escalation of tension across Taiwan Strait. And the Chinese side is taking action in reaction to what has been done by the U.S. side. And our purpose is to send a message, clear and out, to those who are violating the commitment of one China policy, who are supporting one China, one Taiwan, or two Chinas. We're sending a message to those who are trying to split Taiwan from China. The message is clear. This is an action in reaction to the provocations from the U.S. side, from the separatist movements in Taiwan Island. And the reaction is legitimate. It's justified, and there's no reason for a reapproach. And as for how long the military exercise and drills are going to last, I think our spokesman for the National Defense, Minister of Defense, also our spokesperson for the Minister of Foreign Affairs have made it pretty clear that these are the actions as a countermeasure to what has happened, what has been done by the U.S. side, what has been done by the regime in Taiwan. And it's a determination to show that on the question of Taiwan, there's no room for compromise. It's not something like economic development or trade relations or specific issues in some other areas. On the question of Taiwan, it's an issue relating to sovereignty and territorial integrity. There's no room for us to compromise. And as for how long it's going to last, at proper time, I think there will be announcement.
Thank you.
This is actually an interesting point, though, because this is something which can divide people. People who know what has been talked about here, especially with one China policy and the contents of it, knows the response was fine. The actions wasn't a violation necessarily in that vein. And that's the thing. Much like UN treaties, people willingly sign on to support the one China policy. People willingly do it because it's the thing you need to do before you can get economic relations with China or trade with China. Often. So it's like something people sign to have deals with China. And this is the thing. People who are illiterate on this matter, illiterate on Chinese politics and so on, would use this as a form of Chinese aggression, escalation, and as a sign of quote unquote Chinese bullying. But on the other end, it's seen by Chinese as just the fact of reality and the will of the Chinese people. So this is something in which I think the issues comes to play. It's not necessarily the issue of China itself, it's just the issue of the nature of discussion and dialogue. It's often messy. And as you can tell, there was a delay with response that was to be expected. Anyway, I'll continue because there's other stuff I will say, but I'll say it for those times.
Next question is from Anna Henderson and Helen Chen from SBS.
大使先生您好，我是来自 SBS 普通话节目的 Helen Chen。您刚刚提到今年是
Helen Chen is the director of SBS News Mandarin.
是澳中建交50周年，那么中国方面是否会采取一些举措来改善目前两国的关系呢？比如说取消对澳贸易限制，比如说释放在中国被关押近2年的澳洲公民陈雷。谢谢。
And I will just translate in English. Anna Henderson, SBS World News. You mentioned the 50th anniversary of relations between Australia and China. To mark this, is it possible that China will make practical moves to improve the relationship, such as lifting trade restrictions on Australia and or releasing Australian citizen Chang Lei?
This is something interesting as well, in that this sort of line questioning will only start. This is the more mild one. The line of questioning gets even more severe and weird as time gets on. SBS isn't as bad as others, thankfully, in this. It's only asking about trade and some stuff. Well, I don't know the exact reason why Shinle was detained. Do I think it was necessarily legal? Don't think so necessarily. It's highly unlikely, but that's besides the point. But on the trade stuff, See, that will be answered directly well enough by the ambassador, so let's let the ambassador understand.
Well, thank you for the question. As I said in my address, in my speech, there was a difficult time for a couple of years in the past between our two countries, and now there's a opportunity for a possible reset of the relationship. And here we have a good start ever since the new Labour government came into power.
This is actually interesting to note. It's because under the Liberal government, there was no way to will get meaningful change. This is a case in which there was a lot of hope going around about with the change of government, there could be a change of policy, change of direction in terms of how things are. Just any hope of a future which isn't done by hysteria and fear politics. Of course, Labour hasn't been exactly perfect in that and has been supporting the US still. So, in many ways, they're still continuing the legacy of the Liberal Party, but that's a separate issue.
But this is a good start only. And there's a lot to be done to really reset this relationship. And there's a lot of issues on the table, many disputes to be solved. Our policy is that we are for friendly cooperation with Australia. We're ready to work together with Australia's new government to put this relationship back on the right track.
And this shows the intent difference. China was one, as China, you may say that it's only rhetoric, but no, there has been actual measures done to try and fix relations. But it was the Labour government who essentially said, who essentially rejected it, seeing it as a threat and coercion. And it was like, that's the situation regarding this. Do I necessarily feel it is a clear-cut case? Because of course, the Labour government has to do something to still get support, especially from the more neoconservative end who want conflict with China and so on. And these Chinese and the anti-China elements in which they still need to get some support based off to get them power. So in that aspect, I can do that, but I'll continue.
Specifically, I think it's been very helpful if both sides take objective perspective on each other, take positive policies and concrete actions. And in this process, the issues on the table will be gradually solved, or we're going to find out solutions to these issues. Currently, there are being top-level communications, there are being high-level contacts, even face-to-face contacts, but we have not yet come to the stage to discuss about how to solve those specific issues, either political issues or trade issues or some.
And this is, I think, with someone in journalism, it's all about, in some cases, getting hit pieces, trying to expose evils, trying to expose this or that. And in some cases, of course, not all cases, some journalists are fine, but others, some aren't fine in this aspect. Some journalists don't like the fact that some things take longer, some things are more complex that you can't just do hit pieces on. And a speaker of the ABC, which is this ABC Channel 9, and Channel 9 one is give me a perfect example of what I'm saying with that.
Some other individual cases, issues. We're ready to compare those with the new government and to get engaged in this process. As for the trade disputes, as you mentioned, I would rather not to use the word sanctions. I think this issue, perhaps I could categorize it in different groups. One is one kind is trade dispute between the two governments at the government level. These are mainly on the tariffs, tariffs on certain products from Australia. And those were imposed by the Chinese customs. Indeed, it happened. Yeah, that's true. It was an official action. In response to the complaints from some of the Chinese companies who are involved in the similar businesses, they complain about the dumping of certain products from Australia. And once there's a complaint, according to the WTO, the Chinese government has the obligation and the right to increase tariff to protect our own industry. And the case is now in the WTO, and we are ready to sort it out and solve these disputes through WTO with the Labour government. If the new government in this country is ready to discuss it bilaterally, it's okay, we're ready to talk about those things. Second type is more about the people's attitudes. When there was some policies taken or actions taken by the previous Australian government on some of the major Chinese companies, Chinese projects, Chinese businesses in this country, for example, Huawei, ZTE, and many other Chinese companies, causing severe damages economically to these companies. Basically, it's been stopped Huawei of any kind of business in this country.
And that is the point. I think there is, I mentioned earlier before about the previous government's sins isn't being made to be the current government's sins. The option is out there for the current government to fix the previous government's sins in terms of relations. And that is a core point. And one core point I think needs to be really mentioned. There isn't a sin transferal of the Liberal Party to the Labour Party going on here at all. You can't say the same about what would happen about a lot of dialogue about changing of Chinese leadership if it happens. A lot of sins, previous Chinese leaders would be blamed on the next Chinese leader, which is totally hypocritical.
And that's a huge disruption to the normal business relations between our two countries. And these actions have been sending very negative messages to the people in China. And they're not happy, to be honest. And they are, if you look at the reaction from the public in China at that time, even nowadays, they're still not happy about those actions. And just like you go to the shops and you buy something and you're offended, you're not happy, then perhaps you are thinking about go to some other store to buy the similar products. So there are people in China who are really calling for buying some other products rather than the Australian products. That's the attitudes of the public. It happened when we have some problems with our relations with other countries as well. For example, our neighboring country to the east, there was more a severe reaction from the Chinese public. And for this kind of problem, my expectation is that once we have more positive messages, more positive actions, more positive policies to be taken by the new government, it's going to improve the atmosphere. And the people in China will be happy to come back to the market, to come back to Australia, to buy the best quality Australian products, which are very popular in China. That's true. And third category is the caution taken by some of the Chinese companies. They are thinking like, what has happened to Huawei and the ZTE? Is it going to happen to me tomorrow? Is it going to happen to my company some other day? So there are companies from China who used to be interested in the Australian market, but they became cautious. And some of them try to find out alternatives, like investing in Latin America or in Africa. That's true. As ambassador in this country, I'd love to have more investment from China in Australia. And I would like to see an improvement of environment for the businessmen to do business in this country. We have so many things we can cooperate. It's beneficial to our both sides. Thank you. Oh, sorry for the individual cases. There are a couple of Australian citizens in China. They are under custody according to Chinese rules and laws, and their basic rights are well protected. Don't worry about that. And during the pandemic, during the severe periods of the pandemic in the cities where they are detained, there were times when they were not accessible to their relatives or the diplomats of Australia. It was because of the pandemic. Now they can get easy to get access to their relatives either in Australia or their Australian embassies in China. And the case is still under jurisdiction process, and we're going to sort it out according to Chinese rule and the laws. Thank you.
Another example is Xinjiang. When there was the whole thing to boycott Xinjiang companies, later, Wendy. Back in 2 seconds. I was saying about Xinjiang, when there was the whole thing to try and boycott Xinjiang goods and so on, that was a huge thing as well. There were some who just went blindly along with it, wanting to put at risk the chances of some people's employment who were of Xinjiang descent. For what? And that's the core point, is that insecurity in that is a thing that you factor into. Is it something you ignore? No. But it's something you have to deal with. And when you deal with a lot of international weirdness from the US and US aligned states wanting to do political plays against all the time, that can really start impacting a lot of things.
Well, that communicates the Australian concern about Cheng Lei, that's for sure. The next question is from Stephen Jetchitz from ABC.
Hi, Ambassador. Thanks for your time. I'm told that the Taiwan Affairs Office has, in fact, just this morning released a new white paper on Taiwan. And the white paper asserts that China will, quote, not renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. It also says while use of force would be the last resort taken under compelling circumstances, it doesn't lay out what those circumstances are. So
that's a lie. This is a case of a journalist lying. If he did his research properly, he would know what those circumstances are. The circumstances are in a case in which the ROC Constitution is overturned and stuff like that, like really serious stuff.
So can you explain to Australians who are concerned and worried about the prospect of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan and the inevitable consequences of that invasion, what constitutes precisely, in the minds of the Chinese government, a compelling circumstance that would justify a use of force across the strait?
And this is another example of a useless question to ask in this situation. Anything related to One China policy and or Taiwan has been expressly noted in other places. It's not that hard to find. And I'm pretty sure a proper journalist can find it. I mean, because the thing is, if someone who isn't a journalist can find it, a journalist can find it. So he could have rephrased his question. Just saying like, what could be done in the eyes of Australian people to prevent any concerns about escalations or deteriorations or something like that. Something simple, but no. Have to be focused on heavy, heavy dialogue about trying to trap the ambassador?
Well, thanks for the question. In the first place, I'd rather not use the word invasion when we talk about China and Taiwan. Taiwan is different from any other scenario or situation. Taiwan is not an independent state. It's not an independent state. Taiwan is a province of the People's Republic of China. The status of Taiwan is in the Cairo Declaration, it's in the Potsdam Pro-Declaration, it's in the UN resolutions, it's in bilateral documents between China and Australia. Taiwan is a province of China. And the issue between China and Taiwan is an issue between the central government of People's Republic of China with a local government. It's an issue of reunification, complete reunification, and issue of Taiwan coming back to the motherland. As for our approach to the question of the Taiwan, I think it's consistent, clear, and pretty open. We have made that on many occasions.
And on this note, I wasn't watching China Tonight. It was playing background next door. But there was this interview with Stan Grant. There was someone talking about trying to explain the connection between restoring reunification and its emotional impacts. And it's to the point of where Stan Grant then is mocking it, knowing very well it's a highly emotionally charged issue for a lot of Chinese people. And this is something which you saw then is like Stan Grant, the sellout, it's literally insulting someone else's entire opinion.
Past several decades, actually, that the people in the mainland, people in Taiwan, are Chinese. We're both Chinese, and the Taiwanese are compatriots of China, and the least thing we're ready to do is to use force, and that is one of the reasons why China has been so patient. For several decades, we are waiting. We are waiting for a peaceful unification, but we can never rule out our option to use other means. So when necessary, when compelled, we are ready to use all necessary means. As to what does it mean by all necessary means, you can use your imagination. But the people, but the 1.4 billion Chinese people are absolutely determined to protect our sovereignty, territory, and integrity. We will never allow Taiwan to be separated from China. I think that is our policy. Thank you.
Next question is from Ben Packham from The Australian.
Ambassador, thank you. Your colleague, the Chinese ambassador to France, told French media recently that when China takes over Taiwan, it will re-educate its 23 million people. Can you confirm with a yes or no, is that Chinese government policy? Will China re-educate Taiwan's people to change their minds about the Chinese Communist Party?
This sort of questioning can be malicious or just be confusing. Because for some people, the Australian deals with most domestic affairs. I don't really blame the Australian for not understanding some things like this too much because they don't deal with international affairs that much. So, the reason I say it could be anything is because re-education has a bad phrasing. Re-education, I don't think is the correct word. And the other thing is, he used the phrasing re-education change opinions about the Chinese Communist Party. But that's not really the case that should be talked about here. That's just a political point to try and make a political stand. By saying the Chinese Communist Party is trying to make a distinction between the People's Republic of China, Chinese people, and Taiwan separatism. By saying that it could dilute into a warped sense quite easily.
Well, thanks, Ben, for your question. But I didn't read the news about my colleagues' remarks on this particular issue. I think, given the situation that the people in Taiwan, the people in Taiwan are under a regional regime for many decades, it is reasonable for us to understand that their perspective about China, their perspective about their motherland might take somewhat different views. I think this is a fact. But I think the key point now is not about either education or re-education. The 1.4 billion Chinese people, including the 80 million people in Taiwan, are all Chinese. Yeah.
So that sounds like a yes. Is that a yes? It sounds like a yes.
What?
And this shows that it was malicious, because then the answer was responding, and then it's like trying to confer a confirmation bias.
What do you mean by yes?
That it is Chinese policy that they will need re-educating.
Well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of our ambassador in France.
I'm just asking on a point of policy.
The policy?
On a point of policy.
I haven't read about such a official policy, but I think my personal understanding is that once Taiwan is reunited, coming back to the motherland, there might be a process for the people in Taiwan to have a correct understanding of China about their motherland.
Along the lines of the camps that you have in Xinjiang?
And this, the ambassador said here, isn't that different from a lot of pushes from nationalists generally in the Western world? To have integration, to have people integrate into the country, to have everyone be united in the new identity. That's a thing we share as well. Especially for immigration, part of immigration is to form your Australian identity. Would that be seen as quote unquote re-education by many? In some sense, it could, but that still makes the phrasing of re-education in this specific example malicious.
The education process in Xinjiang?
Are we talking about a different topic?
Well, that's a re-education process, isn't it?
No, there's not. I would rather not use the word re-education. The people in Xinjiang are also Chinese citizens, and they receive education in school, in colleges, in universities about China, about their motherland. Yeah, and that's pretty normal.
Thank you.
And normal for the rest of the world as well. Reintegration, when you either immigrate or become part of somewhere, is normal. Integrating to new norm, new society, new laws, normal. It's not unique.
Thank you, Ben.
The next question is from Chris Ullman from the Nine Network.
Ambassador Chris Ullman, Nine News. I was interested in your comments on respect for international law, and also that we needed to have positive policies, and your guidance for the media in Australia about being positive towards China. If I could just make a couple of observations.
And trust me, the observations that he's about to do aren't really observations, they're mostly just slander.
About why people might have a negative view. You've occupied and militarised the South China Sea in contravention of international law. Recently, you threatened an Australian Air Force
the South China Sea stuff. China said they wouldn't develop South China Sea as long as foreign powers didn't intervene in the issue, but they did. So China developed it.
Force aircraft flying over those waters under rights under international law. Under international law, you've imprisoned our citizens without rights to national justice. You have launched thousands of attacks against private and public sector through cyber. You've interfered in our politics, our universities, and our
interfering politics, universities, and so on. Is that really a thing you should be worrying about with China? No, not really. I'd more worry about the US end. The US end is a far more greater concern in relation to interference.
Our diaspora and the people that you call the 1.2 million overseas Chinese, many of them we would call Australian citizens who owe a right, a duty to Australia. So can you
and they're still overseas
see
Chinese.
why it might be that some Australians would think that when you talk about international law and positive policies, you do not do what you say?
Well, I mean, is it a statement? You have no question?
No, I made some observations given you thought we were...
So you are making observations. You are making statements.
I'm making some observations. You were talking about reporting, so I was wondering why you might think that people would not see those things as being negative policies.
And that's a clear example there. They weren't observations, they were statements based on more slander and more dubious elements.
Well, are you inviting me to comment on your observations?
I'm inviting you to comment on whether or not you're occupying and militarising the South China Sea in contravention of international law, and whether or not you threatened Australian aircraft in that airspace.
Okay, I'll try to be brief because you covered quite a number of issues. First, on the South China Sea, China and several other countries, we are all claimants of certain areas and territories in South China Sea. And China, we inherited this claim from our previous government, and who's now in Taiwan, the so-called Republic of China. And there's no room for the people of the Republic of China to deviate from our claim, and we'll continue to stick to the position to protect our sovereignty and territorial integrity. But at the same time, I understand there are differences, there are disputes between China and some other countries. So China and the relevant claimant countries are involved in discussions, consultations, even negotiations bilaterally. And multilaterally, we are involved with ASEAN countries in formulating code of conduct, declaration, DOC, declaration of conduct, now in the process of formulating a COC, code of conduct, trying to sort out a framework for addressing such issues in the future. Secondly, about the existence of China in these areas and the military existence, I mean, it is the necessary measures we have to take to protect the security of the areas which belong to us, and as has been done by many other claimants as well. They have done that much earlier. Thirdly, you mentioned about the aircraft incident, about between China and Australia. May I point it out that that incident was very unfortunate. It happened not in the South China Sea in general. There's a too big area. You cannot say that it happened in the earth. It's happened at a particular location. That location is within the territorial space of an island that belongs to China. So it's just like you're in your house, within your compound. Somebody is driving around, carrying a gun, and trying to peep into your window, see what you're doing in your family and what you're talking about between your family members. You feel being threatened, you feel uncomfortable. So you have to come out and tell those people to keep distance at least.
Under international
so that's
law,
the point I want to make.
Neighbour's house.
And then about the Chinese Australians, I want to say a few words on this because it's so sensitive. There are 1.2 billion Chinese Australians, and these are naturalized Australians. They are Australian citizens. They are loyal to Australia. They are not loyal to China. But at the same time, they came from China. Their ancestors, they have blood relation with China. So they are a linkage of friendship and cooperation between our two countries. And you have to, if you watch very carefully, my embassy is very careful. Ever since I came here 7 months ago, I never comment on the Chinese-Australian issue. During the federal election, I didn't make any comment. Even when I met some of the Chinese Australians, I never talked about the elections. It's their domestic affairs. It's for the Australian people, including Chinese Australians, to make their own choices. At the same time, I want to emphasize this here. Australia is a diversified nation. People from different parts of the world come into this country. They form the community, a nation called Australian people. And Chinese people are part of those people. They are making contribution to this great country. Their interests, just like many other ethnic groups in this country, should be respected. Thank you.
And I guess I leave off with that because that's halfway, basically near halfway point for this anyway. And as you can tell from the final one, there's some people trying to distinctly say and divide up things, trying to say that things aren't as they are, that just because you come Australian, you give up your previous things, which is incorrect and should never be pushed as an idea. You can be Australian, but you can be Australian and other things at the same time. Australian British, Australian European, Australian Chinese, Australian Japanese. You still retain your origin, your family legacy. For example, my family legacy is based in Europe. Does that mean I would just say I'm Australian absolutely and just say that's that? I'm fully Australian. I reject my European legacy. Well, no, because I am very much deep in European legacy as much I have links to Australia. So the insinuation from the Channel 9 journalists to try and say that Chinese people, once they want to become part of Australia, stop being Chinese is wrong. You always are. Part of your ethnicity, you are. You never drop that. It may be convenient for a lot of people in Australia and elsewhere to want that because then it makes it easier to have a distinction between people, distinction if they ever attack China. I mean, properly. It'd make it easy for them. Make it easier for them to distance things and have people opposed to each other. Does that mean that necessarily Chinese Australians are less Australian than anyone else? Not necessarily. If they commit to Australia, they're Australians, technically speaking. But as the ambassador said, they still would retain being Chinese. And there's nothing anyone can say about it. Not a white person, not an Asian person, not a African or European person. You still retain your origin, your legacy, where you come from. And I will end it with that.